Hey kids, the History Channel guy here. So if I were to ask you when and who were the first Europeans to start a war in North America, what would you guess? Well, you'd probably guess Spain sometime in the late 15th, early 16th century. Well, what if I were to tell you the Spanish were not the first Europeans to fight a war in North America, and instead it was the Vikings who fought a war in North America as early as the 11th century? Well, it's true. In today's Small Wars episode, I will go over the brief history of the First and Second Battles of Vinland. Before diving into the details of the battles, though, I feel it is vital to understand the historical context of what is going on. My main source for citing the battles of Vinland comes from the saga of Eric the Red, which is an Icelandic saga citing the Norse exploration of North America in the early 11th century. However, it should be noted that these accounts were not written down until the 13th century, 200 years after the fact, with the saga going through rewrites during the 14th and 15th century. I just mentioned this to ensure my viewers know that you should take all of the historical accounts with a pinch of salt, considering some of the accounts were written almost 400 years after they supposedly occurred. Okay, so here's a synopsis of what happens. According to the saga of Eric the Red, he was banished from Iceland because his thralls misbehaved and destroyed a local farm. A thrall is another term for serf in medieval Scandinavia, and there seems to be some weird ambiguity of whether or not they should be considered a serf or a slave. For simplicity, I will just call them a thrall because I do not want to open that can of worms of whether or not serfdom is slavery. You guys can debate that in the comments. Okay, so being banished from Iceland, Eric goes north to the land which he will name Greenland, in hopes that naming it Greenland will attract other settlers to his new land. A few chapters later, famine is ravaging Greenland, and they eventually stop the famine through singing, which is controversial because of Christianity and former Nordic gods, blah blah blah. Come on, History Channel guy, when are we going to get to the war? We'll get to it right now. Well, eventually a man named Thorfinn Karlsefni visits the settlement in Greenland, and he's eventually tasked with going to Vinland, which is believed to be modern-day Newfoundland. Wow, another video on Newfoundland. Come on, History Channel guys, spice it up. This was not intentional. I didn't know this before I researched it, so sorry. Anyway, previously in 1003, Leif Erikson's son had a conflict with local natives in Vinland. In the battle, Eriksson's son captured and killed 8 local Native Americans. After the natives they swiftly retaliated, but the Vikings were able to defend their beached ships and eventually escape with their lives. At the end of the battle, Eriksson's son wrote that he was wounded in the arm by an arrow, and that arrow would eventually cause his death. Knowing this, Thorfinn knew that local natives in Vinland could be hostile, and therefore he would need a larger voyage. Planning this, he had 3 ships and 140 men. Upon arrival to Vinland, Karlsefni and his men did not have any hostile interactions with the natives. In fact, they spent 2 incredibly harsh winters in the area without any conflict. But they also knew that they would have to live off the land. Knowing this, they actually had some peaceful interactions with the natives who helped the Vikings survive the long winters. Despite the supposed peaceful trade amongst the Vikings and the natives, Karlsefni refused to allow his men to trade any of their weapons with the natives, as he believed that they will be needed for future conflicts with them. Karlsefni ended up being correct. When the natives got frightened by a bull, whatever, that's insane, which broke loose in their camp and started conflict between the two groups. Quickly, Karlsefni and his men retreated back and were attacked by an onslaught of Indians. By the end of the battle, 2 Vikings were slain, along with what the saga describes as, quote-unquote, many of the natives. Despite the initial victory, Karlsefni realized that a permanent settlement would be met with constant Indian attacks, and therefore the settlers would have to move on. Karlsefni's settlement lasted 3 years, making it the longest-lasting settlement in North American history until Christopher Columbus rediscovered the continent in 1492. Though the Battle of Vinland possibly didn't happen because of the saga being written 300 years after the fact, it should be noted that the natives won their first ever war against Europeans on North American soil. Hoo, natives, natives. So, go natives. Unfortunately, their winning streak would be short-lived, but they did stop the encroachment of Europeans for over 400 years, so they got that going for them. Anyway, that's the story of the first and second battles of Vinland. And I just have to say, this has got to be one of the most obscure wars I've ever gone over. Can y'all think of anything more obscure than this? And the Great Emu War doesn't count considering literally every single YouTuber on the planet has done a video on it. But if you guys want more Small Wars, remember to like and subscribe. And thank you for your time. If you want more Small Wars content, let me know and comment what war you possibly want, because as you can see, my standards are incredibly low. Thanks, guys. Bye.